He's been a fixture of every single big screen Batman franchise, but the cinematic attempts at the Joker have never really lined up with the version that we see in the comics. Even when they're great performances with iconic visuals, there's always something that the movies get wrong. We've all seen Thomas and Martha Wayne get shot down in an alley about 47 times, so we all know that superhero movies love to give their viewers an origin story. It's not just for the good guys either. Almost every villain who steps onto the screen brings a whole backstory with them. Normally, that's not a problem, and can actually give those villains the pathos that makes for a compelling story. In the Joker's case, however, it's the exact opposite. The biggest offender in this regard is, of course, Tim Burton's 1989 Batman film, in which Jack Nicholson took on the role of the Clown Prince of Crime. Not only do we get a full origin story, his past gets tied back into Batman's own origin so that we can wrap everything up in a nice bow, which ultimately makes him less interesting. We see that he's a weird, catchphrase-spewing homicidal maniac long before he tumbles into a vat of acid. The only real difference, aside from an admittedly iconic look, is that he gets slightly more artistic with his murders. For a while, it seemed like the movies had learned their lesson on this front. The Joker that we saw in The Dark Knight shows up fully formed and even offers conflicting versions of his own origin depending on who he's talking to.
You wanna know how I got these scars?
Even more recently, Jared Leto's version in Suicide Squad is downright inexplicable in pretty much every way. Now, though, we have an entire movie about the Joker's origin, without any signs of Batman, set for release this year. Hopefully this time, they'll be able to get rid of all that compelling mystery that he's been burdened with for so long. Fans have long accepted the idea that it's Batman who's Bruce Wayne's true identity and not the billionaire playboy alter ego, and it's a good rule of thumb. And yet, the movies treat the Joker, someone who exists specifically in response to Batman, as someone who always has to have that personal connection. Admittedly, they do this with most of the villains as a little bit of origin story shorthand. In the Joel Schumacher films, the Riddler and Poison Ivy are both former employees of Wayne Industries out for revenge against their old boss. The Joker, however, exists specifically to be a counterpoint to Batman. The person under the mask is basically irrelevant compared to the ideological battle being waged against the symbol. That aspect of the Joker's character, however, is continually missed by the films. In the '89 Batman, it's not enough that the Joker's trying to murder the entire city with a cloud of poison gas. There has to be a personal connection to get the crime fighter into action. Even in 2019's Joker solo film, billed as being more of a character study than a superhero flick, Thomas Wayne appears as an antagonist to provide that connection yet again. For all its flaws, the '89 Batman movie incorporates one long-time definitive element of the Joker that no other film does. It's the one that remembers his trademark as poison.
With a new secret ingredient! Smiley.
What is this?
In the comics, Joker toxin dates back to the character's very first appearance in 1940 and has been a signature of the character ever since. In addition to the outright creepiness of a corpse with a smile frozen on its face, there's nothing that captures the Joker's mission statement quite as well as leaving behind dead bodies in his own image, creating a world with more Jokers. For obvious reasons, the campy, kid-friendly 1966 Batman film didn't involve a lot of poison murders. When Heath Ledger offered up a performance that defined the Joker for a new generation, his weapons of choice were knives, explosives, and complicated moral dilemmas, which left very few people smiling. The Suicide Squad Joker seems to favor guns and knives as well, which we know from the scene where he's laying on the floor in a weird circle of them that also includes baby clothes, champagne bottles, and a laptop. It's definitely a striking visual in its own right, but it gets a little less sinister once you start imagining Jared Leto spending hours arranging it all to get it just right. On one level, you have to hand it to the cinematic versions of the Joker. They always set their sights pretty big. In Batman '89, the Joker attempts to poison the entirety of Gotham during the city's bicentennial using a deadly parade.
My balloons! Those are my balloons.
In The Dark Knight, he tries to trick a literal boatload of citizens into blowing themselves up, and that's after a series of high-profile murders and the bombing of a hospital. The Joker of Suicide Squad doesn't get much screen time, but it's already established in Batman vs. Superman that he killed Robin. Even in the '60s version, the Joker's part of a plot to vaporize every delegate of the United Nations at the height of the Cold War. Of course, this isn't really a departure from the source material. Since the 80s, the Joker's body count has been ramped up to the extreme, resulting in a character who's only slightly less lethal than, say, the bubonic plague. Even his attempt to take out the UN is something that would eventually make its way into the comics as part of the A Death in the Family story, even if it's always overshadowed by Robin being killed. The thing is, that's not the only thing the Joker does. While he has a long history of wild, theatrical murders, the Joker is also known for his unpredictability. Sometimes he shows up and poisons everyone, and sometimes he applies for a patent on smiling fish and only turns to murder once he's denied. Sometimes he tries to become the first criminal to commit crimes on the moon. A lot of those stories might result from his decades operating under the comics code, but that bizarre unpredictability is what makes the Joker work as more than just a slasher movie bad guy. The Joker wasn't the first over-the-top thematic crook to show up on the comics page, but if you're looking for a place to draw the line between villain and supervillain, he makes a good place to start.
Wait till they get a load of me.
His arrival in Batman #1 set the standard for costume criminals, and provided the blueprint that supervillains are still using almost 80 years later. More often than not, though, movies treat the Joker as just a slightly more colorful representative of traditional organized crime. While that was true for his first few appearances, Joker became far more than that. In Batman '89, the Joker eventually winds up in full-on supervillain mode, complete with an army of henchmen in matching satin jackets, but at heart, Jack Napier is a gangster, and his first actions after his transformation involve taking over the mob. The same goes for The Dark Knight, where the Joker's introduction involves him taking a contract for the murder of Batman, eventually destabilizing the city's organized crime in order to sow chaos.
What do you propose? It's simple. We kill the Batman.
Suicide Squad might actually be the film that goes furthest, showing the Joker as a mob boss holding court in a nightclub that caters to facial tattoo enthusiasts. Presumably, this is meant to tie the Joker to a more realistic idea of crime, which seems pretty unnecessary. Are audiences only going to accept a genocidal maniac who is turned into a clown by falling into a pit of chemicals, who also fights a man dressed up as a human-sized bat, only if we can relate him to The Sopranos? This is a weird thing to say about the Joker, but sometimes, less is more. Since his first live-action appearance in 1966, the design for the Joker in live action has become more and more over the top. From a visual standpoint, Jack Nicholson was a more or less accurate recreation of what we'd seen in the comics. Heath Ledger combined the traditional purple suit with weird, studiously sloppy face paint and his infamous scars. And Jared Leto, well, you know. The guy has damaged tattooed on his forehead, and that is an aesthetic that doesn't even exist in the same universe as the concept of subtlety. While that particular take on the Joker is certainly memorable, it's not nearly as effective as the relatively restrained Dark Knight version, and not even close to being as iconic as the simpler Batman '89 style. When there's too much to focus on from a visual standpoint, that visual loses its meaning and just becomes a jumbled mess. 2019's Joker seems to be heading back in a slightly more restrained direction. Joaquin Phoenix is back to the painted-on clown makeup, but with the colorful purple suit that matches his comic book counterpart's established tradition pretty well. From a structural standpoint, one of the biggest problems with the movie versions of the Joker is more of a problem with movies themselves. They only really use him once. While he's certainly great as a one-shot villain, the Joker is best used when he's a persistent threat. The idea that he's always out there, able to just stroll out of Arkham Asylum and begin his next chaotic crime spree is a really cool part of his character, just like it is for any comic book supervillain. You never know who's going to make their shocking return, or which mastermind might be manipulating things from behind the scenes in order to make the hero's life a nightmare. That's when the Joker works best, when his exit from the story is more ambiguous than definitive, when no one finds the body, and when you know he'll be back for another round.
I think you and I are destined to do this forever.
Unfortunately, with the very recent exception of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, movies are meant to be more self-contained. Having the Joker linger in the background while a movie focused on less popular and marketable villains would make about as much sense as having Darkseid cooling his heels off-screen while a C-list bad guy like Steppenwolf fought the Justice League in their first big-screen outing. Interestingly enough, there was a thought of doing this during the Dark Knight trilogy. The Joker survives the events of the film, and the novelization for The Dark Knight Rises even mentions that he is the last remaining inmate of Arkham Asylum. Unfortunately, Heath Ledger's tragic real-life death prevented any of those plans from coming to fruition, leaving his performance as a singular take on the Joker. The Joker's scary. He has to be, right? He's the ultimate creepy clown, a mass murderer plotting death behind his smile, an unpredictable foil for a hero determined to stop him at almost any cost. In all honesty, the movies have that one down. The scene in Batman '89 where the Joker unwraps his face and then shatters a mirror laughing while a stammering doctor tries to blame his work on a tray full of rusty tools, that's still legitimately unsettling and a high point of the film. That said, there's one thing the Joker ought to be: funny. It really shouldn't be that difficult to pull off since horror and comedy both rely on a punch of surprise to get their reaction, but it's been a tricky balance for the movies to walk. The closest we've seen to nailing it is, once again, Ledger's performance in The Dark Knight.
Hi.
Ledger's Joker pulls off great, genuinely funny bits of comedy in his performance without ever losing that undercurrent of menace. It's a necessary element recasting Batman as the straight man in an unintentional comedy partnership that usually ends with someone dead. As for the others, well, Nicholson's version wound up being more weird than funny, and Leto's, well, that performance was hilarious, but probably not in a way that was intentional. Still has to count for something, right? Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite heroes and villains are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.